BAM! Welcome to my coding channel. Hello and welcome to a short tutorial about MongoDB. We are going to look into the basic concepts of the database and implement a short example with MongoDB. MongoDB is a document-oriented NoSQL database. This is something you read very often in Wikipedia. What does it actually mean? Document-oriented means it allows to store JSON-like documents, unlike a relational database where you have tables and schemas. This JSON style documents, this JSON format is semi-structured. That means it doesn't have a fixed structure where you have to know the columns or the structure in the beginning, but you can put in a free-form JSON document, so to say, without any schema validation. Besides those JSON documents, MongoDB as well supports blobs to store some files in the database, which is something we are not looking into as part of this tutorial. MongoDB is also a NoSQL database. That means it's non-relational. It has no relations between the entities, and it has also no transactions that you can do in traditional databases. The MongoDB database favors availability and partition tolerance and speed in favor of this transactional safety, in favor of this consistency. Well, how do the data actually look like that we store into the DB? Here's a very simple example. Documents, these JSON things are stored as part of a collection, and here's a sample collection with the name sample. You can query that in the database CLI using db.sample.find, and it will return an array of objects in the database. All objects have an ID. That's, so to say, a generated primary key, and then a free JSON value. In this case, it's just name with a key value store as an example. The main feature of MongoDB is, unlike many people think, is not the data format and this freeform JSON capability, but it's actually its HA features. And this is what I want to lose a few words next. The MongoDB has a capability to run multiple instances in an HA set. This is called here a replica set or replication set. In my example here, we see here in greenish color a client who's connecting to the DB. We see the primary node of the database in blue, and we see secondary nodes, here 2 of them. And overall, this is our MongoDB instance. And MongoDB is set up in the way that all nodes know all other nodes. So the replication set knows is configured, and all nodes know all other nodes. Which node is the primary node in this set is decided by MongoDB itself. Each node can take the role of the primary or of the so-called secondary, or in other databases called master-slave. Here it's called primary and secondary, and each of the nodes can take any of the roles. And the data is replicated to the other nodes using journaling. Journaling is a simple operation log, what was done, that the secondary nodes listen to from the primary node, and then do the same actions that the primary node did, and therefore are on the same, eventually in the same data version like the primary node. And the client addresses this. This is also quite nice about MongoDB by knowing all of the 3 addresses of the nodes, and it can then decide who's the primary. And if it needs to talk to the primary key, for example, to write data, it can decide itself or find out itself which of the nodes is the primary and write the data correspondingly. There are also use cases where you can read potentially a bit older, of course, because you never know how up-to-date the secondaries are, where you can talk directly to the secondary nodes. This is something that MongoDB just lets you configure when accessing via the client. Something that we're not looking into as part of this tutorial, though. What we're doing instead, because this is a beginner tutorial, is we are going to go through an example. We will use Docker to start up 3 instances. We will configure a replication set, that's the replica set that I talked about, and then we write a simple program in NodeJS to connect to that database. First, we will set up the database itself. We will use Docker for that, and we will run a replica set with 3 instances. Before starting the database, we need to pull the Docker image that we can run, containing MongoDB. This might take some more time on your machine. I already had the image on my local machine. Now we can create a network for our cluster containing all 3 nodes. We can then start the instances using their default port. This command runs the image with the specified network, creates the port map, exposes the port 27017, gives the container a name, it runs the MongoDB image, and in there it runs the MongoD command, which is the daemon command to run the database, and our MongoDB instance gets the following parameters: REPL set with the name of the replica set and a port number. With this, we have started the first nodes. We need to do the exact same thing for the other 2 nodes. This is the second node running on port 27018. And here comes the third node running on port 20019. We have now created 3 instances that are running. I can see them very simply here with my Docker desktop application Mongo 1, Mongo 2, and Mongo 3. The MongoDB instances are now up and running, but they don't know each other yet. We have given them a replica set name, but they don't know which other instances are part of the replica set. This is what we are configuring next. To do so, we connect to any of the instances. This runs a Docker command interactively with a TTY. We connect to the container with the name MongoDB1 and we execute the Mongo command, which is the client. The Mongo command automatically connects to localhost in the container, which is where the MongoD daemon runs. As you can see, we are now in the MongoDB shell and can run MongoD commands. What we can do next is get the name of the database. We connect to localhost 27017 and we get a DB, that's the database, with the name test here. DB contains now the name of the database. Next, we are going to create the configuration of the set so that this instance can connect to the other instances. This is our configuration. that we just set in the config variable. As all objects in MongoDB, it has a ID, which is here the set name, a key to identify the document. Also, it contains a list of members in the replica set, which are the other hosts with their host names and ports. Remember, the host names Mongo1, Mongo2, and Mongo3 we specified when running the container, and they are all part of our network. Now we have this configuration in the config variable. We can now use rs initiate replica set initiate config to initiate the configuration. We get a OK back, so the replica set was configured successfully. Also, we see that our terminal changed. We are not anymore in the single node mode, but MongoDB knows its other nodes and is now displaying that this is the secondary node where I'm logged in with the CLI. We're going out of this shell. I used Control C for exiting the shell. Now we have a little bit of problem in this demo configuration. And the problem is that we want to connect to the MongoDB from localhost, but the MongoDB itself is always referenced with Mongo 1, 2, and 3, and this is only part of the Docker network we created. Therefore, we create a host entry in our localhost, in our hosts file on our local machine. Most likely when you have a productive setup or a development setup that runs in the cloud, these things are also already done automatically for you. In the end of the section, we add in the hosts file to forward these three domain names, Mongo 1, Mongo 2, and Mongo 3 to localhost, and we save the hosts file. And we exit as a root user, so we work with a normal user again. I'm going to clear this terminal. Now follows the next step. We're going to create a sample application using the MongoDB client that connect to our running instances. For that, we cd into an empty directory where we can create our little program. We're going to use NodeJS to connect to the database, and we need to install the MongoDB client to access the running instances. Installing this package, we are going to use npm. Therefore, I'm going to create a new npm package here. Probably this is something you already have. I've created the package, and as you can see, we have a new package JSON in our directory generated for us. Next, we're going to install the MongoDB client. This adds the entry as a dependency to the package JSON. Our sample application, we are going to use a simple index.js file. It's a really simple program. Your application is most likely more sophisticated. Just checking here if our application actually runs and does something. Yeah, we can see hello. That is great. Next, we're going to import the MongoDB client. Next, we have to specify the URL to our MongoDB instance so we can connect to it. MongoDB URLs always start with MongoDB Mongo1, which is the name of our first instance, Mongo2, which is the second one, and Mongo3, which is the third one. But this is not enough yet. We also need to specify the name of the database we connect to, which is called test, and we need to specify the replica set name. Now we can initiate the MongoDB client with that URL. Oh, we have the DB name here double, so we can actually move the name up and replace it with a variable. Next, we're going to create a main function where we write the main code to connect to the database and to insert some sample data. This function is going to be called main. I'm just adding some simple error output so we can see if something goes wrong. Also, I'm ensuring that the database client is closed here. That is something you should do more intelligent in your application, and always ensure that when you don't need a database client, it's not dangling and open, but it's actually closed. Here we will write our main program code. And we want to connect to the MongoDB servers. For that, we can use the client that we initiated and call connect. Now we are connected to the database. What we want to do is we want actually to get the database, the MongoDB database, and get the collection where we insert some data. If the collection doesn't exist already, the collection is automatically created. Imagine a collection like a table name in an SQL database. Now we have a reference to the collection and can insert some content. Let's generate some dummy content here that we want to insert. This is some data about myself, but we also want to add some data about some other non-existing persons. Here you see what I mentioned earlier in the presentation. In the same collection, there are going to be two different data sets, and they have two different distinct set of properties. One entry has a nickname and the other entry has an age. And there's going to be a third entry which doesn't have any other property than name. Now we want to insert this data that is stored in the variable content. We're going to use the insert many function for that. MongoDB offers many more functions that you can use to insert and also read data. If this is successful, we have successfully inserted the content. I'm returning a string here just to indicate that we are done, but this is of course something you should never do in a productive application. Let's try out if I made a mistake in this live coding session, which can very well be. No, I didn't. Well, maybe because I wrote this code before and just typed along and talked about it. When executing the program, you can see feedback about MongoDB. It wrote connected to the MongoDB servers, which is something we logged out in the console. You can also see an information about the inserted documents, which is this print statement we added here. Insert results, our variable, contains acknowledged true, so MongoDB has taken this data and the primary node has received it. It doesn't necessarily mean that the secondary nodes have already replicated it, but it means that the primary node has received those data. We see insertion count, how many documents were inserted. This is a feature of the insert many function we use to add the data. And we see the IDs that were inserted, so we can easily access it afterwards. I want to show you how we can see the inserted documents via the CLI on the MongoDB server itself. For that, we're going to use the Docker command we used earlier to connect to the MongoDB server using the CLI. We are now connected to the MongoDB instance, and by chance we are on the primary node of the instance. We are going to connect to the database called test, which is where we inserted the data. We switched to that database successfully, and now we're going to list the collections we have. Nah, that was a little typo. Try that again. Yeah, we see an array of collection names that we have. And we see the sample collection we have created as part of this demo program. Now we can find all the results that are part of that collection using db.sample.find. And as a result, we see all the three entered Francis, Fabian, Peter, and Walter that we have added as part of our program. Thank you for watching this video. Like and subscribe, and most importantly, comment on the video if you liked something or there's something you didn't like. This is my second video ever about software engineering, software development with a very simple example, and I really would appreciate your feedback and what you would wish for in future videos. Thanks for watching.